leadership is the art of hosting and harvesting conversations that matters. And often what we get to see is the hosting. What excites us right now, well, speak for myself, what excites me right now, and just excited me quite a bit, was the hosting of Patricia, of us into this, right? She did very little, but just enough to get us going. And then we took over, and more than took over, but she still held it. So that's the whole hosting we are witnessing when we look at what you just did there, Patricia. So I'm not judging it or validating it, I just liked it. But that's what is happening around hosting. And we often see a lot of the hosting, right? Because that's happening on stage, kind of, whatever stage is to us. What we don't always see necessarily, we might see the manifestations of it, is the harvesting. And actually the processing of outcome, the processing of outcome. But it is yin and yang. Hosting without harvesting doesn't make sense, and vice versa, I guess. What to harvest if there isn't a process, hosted, So you see they go together. You see they go together. So when we begin to design a process, we begin to design harvest. That's basically what we do. We keep an eye on both when we do this work. And we're going to do it together, actually. We're going to look back until yesterday, all of us. But first of all, I just want to give you an introduction, a little bit deeper into harvesting. And I'm going to move you two ladies again, which, sorry about that, because I'm going to write on this one. And maybe you, Greg, or two. I don't know. You don't. Yeah. You can see our PowerPointing is always emerging a bit. So I just set the scene for it, but just to speak a bit more about it in the narrative of art of hosting. In the early days of art of hosting, there in the mid-90s, what I just said, we discovered that quite quickly. If you don't just want glazing, window dressing, whatever we call all these things, where people are in a nice conversation, and they do have good energy, and they do make whatever raps together and all that, but we want more out of it. We want maybe even a result out of it. We might even have words as impact and implementations and actions and change process and all that. We often know that it needs to lead to something. Some of it might be very tangible, fair enough, action plan. But some of it might be very intangible, the relation between two people, the sense of being belonging to a specific culture in a company, for instance. It's very intangible. But we need to sense and think how we can capture both. And then we need to refeed it into the process. Because that's what we saw. What we did at all times when we started we called it documenting. And then we began to work, it's not always easy with us and words, because then we called it learning ecology. I actually have documents where we say, so what is the learning ecology of this process? That's not really easy to understand. But what we meant with it, that was very Danish, with that actually, was that we want to refeed the system with its own outcome. With its own outcome. So whatever the process is, at some point, we kind of harvest what is, and we refeed it into the system, and it continues. And then have a transition point again, harvest what is, refeed it into the system. Opa. In these trainings, you experience it a bit. It's a little bit difficult here, because we are not sitting, we are more coming here as individual, which is another framework you can harvest in, individual and collective. I'll come back to that. Here we are more coming as individuals. As I know some of you are coming as groupings. You're coming from, I know there's a group from Ernst & Young, for instance, right? Good rappers, actually, in Ernst & Young. Next Christmas party, you know what to do. So some of you are coming as groups, but we do not have one collective purpose in the center, besides a sense of we're here to learn and see new ways, but we're not here as one group. So sometimes in trainings like this, for instance, you saw it from the World Cafe yesterday, what was up there, it's not necessarily, it's more what do you take from that than what does the group take from this. And that's of course very different from the story that Yasmina talked about yesterday, where we had this brick company, whatever it was, that was having a vision, because that's their collective intention. So that's what they're harvesting towards, right? You see the difference in that. But still we want to refeed the system. So throughout a process, every time we have some level of convergence, we are kind of harvesting a piece of the process and refeeding it into the system. And then of course there is the whole outcome of that process. Let's say, sorry, this is a day, 2 days or whatever. So the way we work with this is, and I'll come back to outcome, and that's why we call it learning ecology, and then the metaphor of harvest, you're seeding something, you nurture it, you see it grow. Sometime it might be, the word apples was yesterday a part of it. So you see a tree grow, and you make sure you kind of make some baskets so you can catch the apples or the low-hanging fruits or whatever high-hanging fruits there are, and you can consume it and you kind of refeed it into the system. So that's the thinking behind why we talk about harvesting. Some comes from contexts where they're used to a sense of documentation. They're also used to, in some context, they work with what they call rapporteurs. And that's people who report every single word, more or less, of what has happened. And that's great, but that's not what we do when we do harvest. We take the essence. So changing the metaphor, it's like washing gold. There's a lot of sand in there, but there's also gold. And what is that, right? So that's the process of harvesting, that we're actually looking for the outcome that matters. And how do we know that? Well, we know that because we started out asking ourselves, why is there a need? You cannot see that at all. But why is there a need for this? Why is there a need for this specific process? Why is there a need for them having a vision? And what is the purpose of this process? Is the purpose of this process to come up with maybe a level of granularity, but anyway, coming up with input for a new vision? Then we know what to look for, right? So you determine it by understanding what is the need and what is the purpose. And that you need to determine up front in your first inquiry with a client, with a hierarchy, with whatever you need to inquire with. Whoever calls upon this process, you need to do your pre-work, or preparational work in such a way that it becomes clear for you what is the need of this. First of all, is there a need? And secondly, yes. Okay, so what is the purpose of that? The very second you know that, you skip all the other steps in the design process. We'll come back to that. And then you go directly to outcome and then begin to think of, well, if this is the purpose, what is then the outcome? When I look for purpose, I look for a long purpose and a short purpose, or let's call it short and long. The short purpose is the process in itself. Well, we need to come up with a new vision or a input for a new vision in this company. Fair enough, that's the short purpose. That's the purpose of the process in itself, this 1 day or 2 days. But I'm also asking, what is the long purpose of this is, why do you need a new vision? What is it that this new vision should give you that will support your core business or core purpose of your company or your organization? What is the long-term thinking of that? Because if I understand that, we can help them with the harvest outcome to serve that as well. What I'm saying here is also that the harvest really kicks in the post-process, meaning after the actual workshop, for instance, in itself. The post-process. In the post-process, when we know what to look for in outcome, is making sense. Making sense out of what was the outcome. We know what is harvested, So I'm just looking at some of the things we have on the wall here. We know what was harvested out of the specific processes that leads to, maybe in this case, a new vision. I'm kind of orbiting around this project there. But how do we make sure that we can actually land this in a way so it becomes valuable input? And we might still work with what was there, but we might need to use some kind of framework to understand what was the outcome and how can we serve it. To do that, we are going back to this thing I talked about, where we are looking at what is tangible and what is intangible. Also, what is collective and what is individual. I'm having a glance here at the templates you're going to work with, so I'm going to write it like they're collective, individual, intangible, and tangible. So if we look for something like a new vision, we might also look for what are the actions we need to take to kind of implement this vision. I don't know exactly what you did, but that will often be the case. So when we ask ourselves, upfront still, when we're going to harvest this, we know that they're going to proceed after this workshop of kind of finishing or finalizing this vision, maybe having might be a communication process or a more involvement process of having everybody saying, yeah, that's cool, that was our input to the new vision, that is the vision, I can kind of say check on that. And okay, then here are the actions that we need to take somehow to implement it and use it for something. These things are often what is a collective coming up with, and it serves the collective. And often we're looking for it to be quite tangible. I don't know if that vision is something that's going to hang on a wall or being on a website, or I don't know, but it's going to be used for something, probably in the strategic outlook for the next whatever, right? So that's our vision, that's what we're working towards. So they're going to use it for something often where it can manifest itself. That's what companies often will use a vision to do. And so it needs to be quite tangible, right? There might be actions following, so we might have an action plan, actually, a really physical action plan attached to that work. So that's what we're looking for in the collective, tangible part. On the collective, more intangible, which is often the most interesting, because there we're often looking for the drivers who will make this happen. What we're looking for in the tangible is often a sense of interpersonal things. It could be if we have something like interpersonal, but also between what we create and who we are. So what if we create, for instance, a vision and an action plan, we're looking for something as simple as ownership. Do we feel ownership to this? Because we know that if you have a sense of ownership to what was created, and we can continue that, the likelihood of this implementation being impactful is there, right? If you have no ownership of it, it's like, okay, well, I didn't even, and if that's their vision, fine, I'll obey to that, fine, could be anything, you know what I mean? So we have a sense of ownership to that. We might also have a sense of engagement, enthusiasm around it, and it's all intangible stuff that kind of lives in us. It's in, yeah, I'm pointing at my heart, or where that's supposed to be at least. So these things we will also try somehow to harvest. You cannot really do that on paper necessarily. You can do that in continuing having conversations around it, or you can simply ask people, do you feel any ownership of that? Or do you feel that, or what is missing if you've da-da-da? We can ask for things that will actually reveal, are there any intangible outcome of that? Sometimes you can sense it, you can feel it, you can also describe it. If anyone, you just, Patricia, you just described the outcome, intangible outcome of our check-in. You said something about the energy in the room, the positiveness, stuff like that. All intangible, and I think we all kind of like, yeah, that's there. And just us kind of becoming aware of it changes it. For those of you who work with cultural change in organization, that's often the case of it. We need to become aware of what is it and where and how is it changing. That in itself would make it change. And then of course there are the individual tangibles. In a process like that, I don't know if there might not be any individual tangible outcome. There might not. I don't know if there was actually. It's easier in that kind of process to think of it. But in the training, for instance, it's much more likely that there are a number of tangible individual outcomes. Sorry, can I borrow this? I'm not going to show it necessarily like this. But this is your notebook, right? This is a tangible individual outcome. All your notes, it's quite tangible to you. You might do many other things, right? Whatever you do, it's very tangible outcome. We talked about photos that could be tangible. A picture tells more than 1,000 words and all that. And kind of helps you integrate your learning. And once again, when we talked about the intangible individual, well, we'll often come to your sense of belonging, for instance, or your sense of understanding, or your sense of how can I apply this, which let's say talk about participatory leadership, how can I apply that in my own context? It might kind of strengthen your own courage to take a next step to say, oh, I'm going to do this on Monday when I'm back at office. I'm going to do that. I'm going to invite them into a World Cafe. Why? Yeah, I learned the methodologies, but because I had the opportunity to step up here and practice, I feel empowered. That's an intangible individual outcome, to feel empowered. I cannot give you, I can give you tons of diplomas, or we can, but that will not necessarily make you feel empowered unless you feel it, right? Often what I will say is, it's really nice with all the tangible stuff. I think we need it, often, because sometimes we also need to share it. Also, sometimes we need to share it with people who is not part of the process. That's actually a whole post-process in itself. How do we do that? But it's actually the whole intangible things, all the intangible things that make it happen. It's not, you can come up with whatever action plans you want, whatever strong, valuable input for our new vision. But unless there is a sense of ownership, engagement, enthusiasm, willingness, empowerment, I'm not trying a new rap here, but whenever we do that, it's not happening. That's actually what I see. So when I talk to my client in the very beginning, around need, around purpose, I immediately begin to talk about outcome. I actually sometimes draw this and talk about it, because they know it too. But they have a sense of thinking of this corner, a tangible collective outcome. We need an action plan. We need a resource budget. We need business scenarios. Okay, cool, fine. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to harvest towards that. We don't know the content of it. That's why we do this. But we know that's what we're aiming at. But let's not forget this. Let's not forget still to make this aware in our group of what that is. Sometimes what I do in the checkout, I make them aware of this. Don't necessarily just ask, so what are the intangible outcomes for you? Because they're like, what? No, but what made a difference for you? What is the one takeaway you'd have from this, something that inspired you? Whatever. What is the one thing that will make you do this, almost like? So we become aware of it at least, and we kind of keep it alive. But that's more about post-process. So harvesting is our design of the process we need in order to surface the valuable outcome. Identify, help support the group identify a valuable outcome. The valuable, that's sometimes the tricky. That's where it relates to what matters. And you can, or we can sometimes get trapped in us thinking we know what is valuable, but I'm just saying we don't. Or at least we need to take one step back from that, even though if we do, and we need to trust whatever content they bring, that's what we are going to record, document, and put forward, right? So don't get into the trap that we are trying to analyze too much on the qualitative data here, to speak that language. keep it real to what was it that they came up with, right? When I look at the outcome for your World Cafe yesterday, I could begin to cluster that and give it headlines, but it'll be my headlines. It'll be my judgment of what you came up with. It will be much stronger if I asked you, even if I asked a group of you to represent all of you, to cluster these and give it headlines, and then involve the rest and say, hey, are they okay? You will more likely say, yeah, it's fine, than if I did it. Because I was not part of that process. I'm coming in from the left or right and saying, hey, this is what I see. So please stay in it. I'm just flagging that, because sometimes we have, that could be a pitfall when we are in the harvesting process. Keep it real to what is, but provide them with frameworks so they can do it, so they can help them. We work with templates. We work with different mental models that will help them understand where can I put my outcome in such a way that it becomes actually valuable for me. So that's part of designing the harvesting process.